You are listening to HOA Backfired. This is the pettiest snow emergency ever. You are about to learn what a compliance hearing feels like. That is what Betty Evans yelled at me while waving a handheld infrared thermometer at my walkway like it was a radar gun and I had just blown through a school zone. She jabbed the device toward the concrete, squinted at the little screen, then looked up at me with the kind of triumph you see on someone who just found out they were right about you being terrible all along. It was 14 degrees outside, 3 days after the blizzard buried Missoula under 2 feet of snow, and she was telling me my cleared walkway was too cold to be safe. She was issuing an emergency hazard fine unless I applied more de-icer immediately. I am a lineman for the electric utility. I work emergency call-outs. I had just finished a 16-hour shift restoring power to a subdivision on the north side, and I came home to find Betty standing on my property with a clipboard covered in a clear rain cover, her red knit hat pulled low, and that reflective armband strapped over her white-belted wool coat sleeve like she was directing traffic at a disaster scene. She had backup. 2 neighbors stood behind her near the curb, whispering to each other and holding salt buckets like they were part of some HOA snow patrol task force. Betty said the Westgate HOA board had implemented emergency winter safety protocols, and I was in violation of Section 12 subsection D, which required walkways to be maintained at a safe surface temperature during freeze events. I asked her what a safe surface temperature was. She said the board would determine that on a case-by-case basis, but right now my walkway was registering 18 degrees and that was a slip hazard. I pointed out that the air temperature was 14 degrees. She said that was irrelevant. The walkway surface had to be warmer than ambient or it created black ice risk. I said I had shoveled and salted the entire path. She said the salt was not working fast enough and she was documenting the violation. She aimed the thermometer at different sections of my walkway, announcing each reading like a prosecutor laying out evidence. 19 degrees. 16 degrees. 22 degrees near the porch. She scribbled notes on the clipboard without looking down, her pen scratching across the wet plastic cover. I could see my breath in the air and hers, 2 clouds mixing in the space between us. She told me this was my second winter violation this month. I said I had not received a first violation. She said it was mailed. I said I never got it. She said that was my problem, and now I was looking at a $200 fine plus a mandatory compliance inspection within 72 hours. I asked to see the rule she was citing. She flipped a page on her clipboard, held it up but kept it angled away so I could not read the text, and said it was all clearly outlined in the emergency addendum approved at the December board meeting. I said I did not get a copy of any emergency addendum. She said it was posted on the community portal and emailed to all residents. I pulled out my phone and opened my email right there. No message. I showed her the screen. She glanced at it and said I must have marked it as spam, and ignorance of the rules was not a defense. She stepped closer, her boots crunching on the thin layer of snow I had not yet cleared from the edge of the walk. "Keep arguing. You are making my case for me." She said it like she was doing me a favor by letting me demonstrate how unreasonable I was. I felt my jaw tighten. I wanted to tell her that I had been up in a bucket truck in sub-zero wind for the last 16 hours while she was probably sitting in her heated living room inventing new ways to harass people. But I kept my mouth shut, because I already had a bad feeling about where this was going, and I did not want to give her anything she could twist later. She informed me that if I did not apply additional de-icer within the next 2 hours, she would escalate the matter to the HOA management company and request an emergency lien process. I said it was 10 at night. She said the weather did not care about the time, and neither did liability. She turned to the 2 neighbors and said something I could not quite hear, but they both nodded. One of them, a guy in a gray parka, gave me a look that was half pity and half warning. The other, a woman with a salt bucket, just stared at her boots. Betty pulled a phone out of her coat pocket and took 3 photos of my walkway, the flash lighting up the snow like a crime scene. She muttered something about documentation standards, then turned back to me and said the inspection would happen Thursday morning at 8. I told her I had to travel Thursday. I was covering a call-out shift in Kalispell and would not be back until Friday night. She said that was unfortunate, and if I was not present for the inspection, it would be marked as non-compliance and the fine would double. I said that was not reasonable. She said the board would decide what was reasonable, and right now I was wasting her time. She handed me a bright yellow slip of paper from the clipboard. It had the Westgate HOA logo at the top and a bunch of printed text I could not read in the dark, but I caught the words violation notice and required action in bold. I folded it and shoved it in my coat pocket. Betty told me she was the reason this neighborhood stayed civilized, and people like me who thought the rules did not apply were exactly why the board had to take enforcement seriously. Then she walked off, the 2 neighbors trailing behind her like deputies leaving the scene. I went inside and collapsed on the couch without even taking off my boots. My body ached from the shift, my hands were stiff, and my head was starting to pound the way it does when I do not get enough sleep. I have a condition. Nothing dramatic, just something that flares up when I am run down. Stress makes it worse, and sleep disruption makes it worse, and right now Betty Evans and the Westgate HOA board were doing both. I knew I needed to rest, but I also knew I could not let this slide. I pulled out the yellow slip and read it under the lamp. The violation notice claimed I had failed to maintain a clear pedestrian path, failed to apply adequate de-icing materials, and created a public safety hazard. It demanded immediate corrective action, listed a $200 fine payable within 10 days, and scheduled a compliance inspection for Thursday at 8 in the morning. There was no mention of walkway surface temperature. There was no citation of Section 12, subsection D. The violation was generic and vague, like it had been copied from a template. I grabbed my laptop and logged into the Westgate HOA community portal. I scrolled through the message board, the documents section, the announcement feed. I found the December board meeting minutes, but there was no mention of any emergency winter addendum. I checked my email spam folder. Nothing. I checked my trash folder. Nothing. Either Betty was making this up, or the board had selectively enforced a rule that was never properly distributed. I made a folder on my desktop and started saving screenshots. Portal homepage. Meeting minutes. Email folders. The violation notice itself photographed with my phone under good light so every word was clear. I did not know what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I needed a paper trail, because this was not going to be the last time Betty came at me. I could feel it. This was personal for her. The firewood stack on the side of my house had been there since October. It was neatly stacked, covered with a tarp, and set back from the property line. But Betty had mentioned it twice in passing over the last month, always with that disapproving look, like I was turning the neighborhood into a lumber yard. I sent a text to my buddy Craig, who lives 3 streets over in the same HOA. Retired cop, mid-60s, and the only person in this neighborhood who does not treat the HOA board like a local government. I told him what had just happened. He replied within 2 minutes. That is harassment. Document everything. Do not pay the fine until you get a hearing. Betty has been pulling this on other people too. Snow removal, decorations, trash cans left out 5 minutes too long. She is building a reputation. I felt a little better knowing I was not the only target, but also worse knowing this was a pattern. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat back down at the laptop. I pulled up the Montana HOA statutes and started reading. Enforcement procedures, notice requirements, appeals processes. It was dry and technical, but it confirmed what I already suspected. The HOA could not just invent rules on the fly and enforce them retroactively without proper notice. If Betty was going to claim I violated an emergency addendum, she had to prove that addendum existed, that it was lawfully adopted, and that it was properly communicated to residents. I did not have proof it was not communicated, but I had proof that I never received it, and that was a start. Thursday morning came fast. I was supposed to leave for Kalispell by 6 to make the crew briefing at 8. I set my alarm for 5, got up in the dark, and checked my front walkway with a flashlight. It was clear. No ice, no snow buildup, no visible hazards. I salted it again just to be safe, then went back inside and made coffee. At 7:30 my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. A woman's voice, clipped and professional, said she was calling from the Westgate HOA management company to confirm my compliance inspection at 8. I told her I had to travel for work and could not be present. She said the inspection would proceed without me, and if any violations were found, I would be notified by mail. I asked if I could reschedule. She said emergency inspections could not be rescheduled. I asked who requested the inspection. She paused, then said it was submitted by the safety committee chair. I thanked her and hung up. I called Craig. He picked up on the second ring. I told him about the inspection. He said Betty was trying to box me in. If I was not there, she could claim anything she wanted, and I would have no way to dispute it. He said he would go over and witness the inspection himself. I asked if that was allowed. He said the HOA could not stop a resident from standing on a public sidewalk and observing what happened on another resident's property. He told me to go to Kalispell, do my job, and let him handle it. I felt a knot loosen in my chest. I told him I owed him. He said I did not owe him anything, but when this was over I should run for the board and vote Betty out. I drove north through snow-packed roads and made it to the Kalispell yard by 8:15. The call-out was a transformer failure on a rural line, and we spent the whole day in the cold replacing hardware and splicing cables. I kept my phone in my coat pocket and checked it every chance I got. At 11, Craig sent me a text. Betty showed up with a contractor. Guy had a clipboard and a camera. They walked your property for 20 minutes. I watched from the sidewalk. They took photos of your firewood, your walkway, and your trash cans. Betty tried to tell me to leave. I told her I was on public property and she could call the police if she had a problem. She did not call. I felt a surge of gratitude. Craig was solid. At 2 in the afternoon, I got another text from Craig. The contractor just left. Betty stayed behind and knocked on your door. No answer, obviously. She left a door hanger. I walked over after she left and took a photo of it for you. He sent me a picture. The door hanger was another yellow slip, this one with more text. It said the inspection had found multiple violations, including visible storage of combustible materials, inadequate walkway maintenance, and improper refuse container placement. It listed a $500 fine due within 7 days and stated that failure to pay would result in a lien filing. I stared at the screen. $500. For firewood and trash cans. I called the HOA management company from the truck during lunch break. I got the same woman I had spoken to that morning. I told her I wanted to appeal the inspection findings. She said I had 10 business days to submit a written appeal to the board, and the board would schedule a hearing within 30 days. I asked if I could see the inspection report. She said it would be mailed to me within 5 business days. I asked if I could get it sooner. She said no. I asked if the contractor who did the inspection was licensed or bonded. She paused, then said she would have to check with the safety committee chair. I said I would wait. She put me on hold for 3 minutes, then came back and said the contractor was a preferred vendor with the HOA and his credentials were on file. I asked for his name and company. She said that information was confidential. I thanked her and hung up. I did not chase her accusations, because I already had the receipts. That was my strategy from the start. Let Betty escalate. Let her stack up the fines and the violations and the inspections. Let her create a paper trail that showed a pattern of selective enforcement and vendor favoritism. Because I knew something she did not know yet. I had a friend who worked in risk management for an insurance company, and I had already sent her a copy of the first violation notice. She told me that if the HOA was using harassment and unfounded violations to target residents, their liability coverage could be at risk. Insurance companies do not like patterns of abuse. They especially do not like it when those patterns are documented and could lead to lawsuits. I was not planning to sue. But the board did not know that, and the threat of a coverage review would be enough to make them panic. I finished the Kalispell job Friday afternoon and drove back to Missoula in the dark. I was exhausted, my shoulders ached, and I wanted nothing more than to sleep for 12 hours. But when I pulled into my driveway, I saw something that made my stomach drop. My truck was gone. Not my work truck, my personal truck. I had left it parked on the street in front of my house Thursday morning because the driveway was still covered in packed snow and I had not had time to clear it before leaving. Now the spot was empty. I got out and looked around. No truck, no note, no explanation. I walked to Craig's house and knocked. He opened the door, took one look at my face, and said, "Come in." I told him my truck was gone. He said he saw a tow truck on the street Thursday afternoon, maybe an hour after Betty left. He did not think anything of it at the time because the HOA had been towing vehicles parked in violation of the snow emergency rules. I asked what snow emergency rules. He said the board passed a resolution in January that banned street parking during active snow events and for 72 hours after. I said the storm was 4 days ago. He said Betty was probably stretching the timeline. I asked if he got a photo of the tow truck. He shook his head. I felt my hands curl into fists. I forced them to relax. I called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher told me to contact the HOA or the towing company. I said I did not know which towing company. She said I could check with the city impound lot, but if it was an HOA tow, it would be at a private yard. I asked how I was supposed to find out which yard. She said I would have to ask the HOA. I thanked her and hung up. I called the HOA management company. It was after hours. I left a voicemail. I called Betty's cell phone. I did not have her number, but Craig gave it to me. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. I left a message. I said my truck had been towed and I needed to know where it was and who authorized it. I kept my voice calm and professional, even though I wanted to scream. Saturday morning, I got a call back from the HOA management company. Different person this time, a man who sounded bored. He told me my vehicle had been towed under the authority of the Safety Committee for violation of the snow emergency parking ban. I asked which tow company. He gave me a name. I asked who authorized it. He said the Safety Committee chair. I asked if there was any documentation. He said the authorization was on file and I could request a copy through the records request process, which would take 7 to 10 business days. I asked where my truck was. He gave me the address of a tow yard on the west side of town. I drove to the yard in my work truck. The place was a gravel lot surrounded by chain-link fence with a small office trailer near the gate. I went inside. A woman behind the counter looked up from her phone and asked if I was there to pick up a vehicle. I said yes. She asked for my ID and the vehicle description. I gave her both. She typed into a computer, frowned, then said the HOA paperwork was missing and she needed me to prove chain of custody. I asked what that meant. She said I had to show proof that I owned the vehicle and that the tow was authorized. I said I had the title in my glove box at home. She said that would work for ownership, but I also needed a signed authorization from the HOA. I said the HOA authorized the tow, so they should have the paperwork. She shrugged and said not her problem. I called the HOA management company from the parking lot. Same guy. I told him the tow yard was asking for signed authorization. He said he would email it to them. I asked how long that would take. He said probably Monday. I said today was Saturday and I needed my truck. He said there was nothing he could do over the weekend. I asked to speak to his supervisor. He said his supervisor was not available. I hung up and sat in the work truck staring at the tow yard through the fence. My personal truck was right there, parked in a row of vehicles near the back. I could see the roof and the bed. But I could not get to it because of a missing piece of paper that should have been filed before the tow even happened. I called Craig again. I told him what happened. He said Betty was playing games. Tow yards do not just accept verbal authorization from an HOA, there is always paperwork. Either Betty did not file it, or the yard lost it, or the management company screwed up. He said I should file a complaint with the city about improper towing procedures. I said that would take weeks. He said it would also create a record, and records mattered when you were building a case. I told him I was not trying to build a case, I was trying to get my truck back. He said I was already building a case whether I wanted to or not, because Betty was not going to stop. Monday morning, I called the management company at 8. The guy said he had emailed the authorization to the tow yard. I called the tow yard. The woman said she had not received anything. I called the management company back. The guy said he would resend it. I called the tow yard an hour later. Still nothing. I drove over there in person. The woman printed out her email inbox and showed me. No message from the HOA management company. I called the management company from the yard office and put the call on speaker. The guy insisted he had sent it twice. The woman said she was looking at her inbox right now and there was nothing. He said he would send it again while I was on the line. We waited. 30 seconds. 1 minute. 2 minutes. The woman refreshed her inbox. Nothing. The guy said it must be a spam filter issue on her end. The woman said her spam folder was empty. I asked the guy to send it to my email instead. He said he could not do that because it was HOA internal correspondence. I asked him to read me the authorization number so I could give it to the yard. He said he could not do that either. I left the yard and drove to the management company office. It was in a strip mall near the university. I walked in and asked to speak to someone in person about the tow authorization. The receptionist said everyone was in a meeting. I said I would wait. She said the meeting could take an hour. I sat down in the waiting area and pulled out my phone. I opened the voice recorder app and started a new file. I did not know if I would need it, but I was not taking chances anymore. 40 minutes later, a woman in a blazer came out and introduced herself as the property manager for Westgate HOA. I stood up and shook her hand. I told her I needed the tow authorization sent to the yard immediately so I could get my truck back. She said she understood my frustration, but the authorization had already been sent multiple times and the issue was on the yard's end. I said I had just been at the yard and watched the email inbox in real time. Nothing came through. She said she would look into it and get back to me. I said I needed my truck today. She said she would do her best. I asked if I could speak to Betty Evans directly. The property manager's expression tightened. She said the safety committee chair was not available and all correspondence had to go through the management company. I said that was fine, but I wanted to file a formal complaint about the towing process. She asked what the nature of the complaint was. I said the tow was unauthorized, improperly documented, and appeared to be retaliatory. She said she could not comment on that without reviewing the file. I said I would wait while she reviewed it. She said that was not possible. I asked when it would be possible. She said she would call me by end of business. I thanked her and left. I did not get a call by end of business. I got a call Tuesday morning at 7. The property manager said the authorization had finally been received by the tow yard and I could pick up my truck anytime. I asked why it took 4 days to send a single email. She said there had been a technical issue with their system. I asked if I would be reimbursed for the towing and storage fees. She said that was between me and the HOA board and I could submit a reimbursement request at the next board meeting. I asked when the next board meeting was. She said March 10th. I said that was 3 weeks away. She said board meetings were held monthly and that was the schedule. I asked if there was an emergency meeting process. She said emergency meetings required a quorum and a written request signed by 3 board members. I thanked her and hung up. I drove to the tow yard. The woman at the counter printed out an invoice. $250, $75 for the tow, $50 per day for storage. 4 days. I paid with a credit card and she handed me the keys. I asked for a receipt that showed the date and time the vehicle was towed. She printed one. Thursday, 2:45 in the afternoon. I asked if the receipt showed who authorized the tow. She said it just listed the HOA name. I asked if she had any other documentation. She said the authorization email had finally come through that morning and she could print it if I wanted. I said yes. She printed it. It was a generic form with the HOA logo, the vehicle description, the date, and a signature line. The signature was illegible, but the printed name below it said Betty Evans, Safety Committee Chair. I took the form and the receipt and drove home. I scanned both documents and added them to my evidence folder. I was up to 12 files now: screenshots, photos, emails, receipts, violation notices. I opened a new document and started typing a timeline. December 1st. Firewood comment. January 15th, first walkway violation. January 20th, compliance inspection. January 23rd, truck towed. I listed every interaction, every phone call, every fine. I noted the amounts. $200, $500, $250 for the tow, $950 total. For firewood, trash cans, and a walkway that was cleared and salted. Craig called me that afternoon. He said he had been talking to other residents and Betty had hit at least 6 people with bogus violations in the last 2 months. One guy got fined for having his trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours. Another got fined for not shoveling a side path that was not even part of the HOA common area. A woman got fined for parking her car in her own driveway because Betty said the driveway was not fully cleared and the vehicle overhang created a snow hazard. Craig said the pattern was clear. Betty was using the safety committee rule to harass people she did not like, and she was using a contractor to rubber stamp her complaints. He said I should ask for the contractor's credentials and see if there was a financial relationship between the contractor and the HOA board. I called the management company and requested the contractor's business license and proof of insurance. The property manager said that information was proprietary. I said Montana open records law required HOAs to disclose vendor contracts to residents upon request. She said she would check with legal and get back to me. I said I would follow up in 48 hours. She said that was fine. I hung up and sent an email to the same address, restating my request in writing and citing the statute. I copied Craig and BCC'd my personal email so I had a backup. Wednesday afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered. A man's voice, calm and slightly condescending, said he was calling on behalf of the Westgate HOA board. He said his name was Richard and he was the board president. He said he understood I had some concerns about recent enforcement actions. I said that was correct. He said the board took resident concerns seriously and wanted to resolve this amicably. I said I wanted the fines rescinded, the tow fees reimbursed, and an apology for the harassment. He laughed. Not a mean laugh, just a laugh that said I was being unreasonable. He said the fines were legitimate, the tow was authorized, and the board stood by the safety committee's decisions. I said the safety committee chair was abusing her authority. He said that was a serious accusation and I would need to provide evidence. I said I had evidence. He said he would be happy to review it at the next board meeting. I said I wanted a hearing before the board meeting. He said that was not how the process worked. I asked what the process was. He said I could submit a written appeal, the board would review it, and they would issue a decision within 30 days. I said 30 days was not acceptable. He said it was the policy. I thanked him and hung up. If you are enjoying this HOA nightmare, hit subscribe because you will not believe what happens when I finally show the board what I have been collecting. Thursday morning, Betty showed up at my door again. I saw her through the window. She was standing on my porch, holding that clipboard with the clear rain cover, and she had someone with her. A man in a neon yellow vest and a gray coat holding a professional camera on a gimbal. I opened the door before she could knock. Betty said she was conducting a follow-up inspection to verify compliance with the January 20th findings. I said I had not received the inspection report yet. She said that was not her problem. I asked if she had scheduled this inspection in advance. She said emergency inspections did not require advance notice. I said this was not an emergency. She said the board had determined it was. I asked to see the board resolution. She said it was in the meeting minutes. I said the meeting minutes did not mention my property. She said I was wasting her time. The man with the camera started filming. He walked to the edge of my porch and aimed the lens at the firewood stack on the side of the house. Betty stepped past me and pointed at the stack. She said the tarp was not secured and the wood was visible from the street. I said the tarp was secured with bungee cords. She said it was flapping. I looked. There was no flapping. The tarp was tight. She turned to the camera guy and said, "Make sure you get a clear shot of the loose covering." He nodded and zoomed in. I said, "You are trespassing." Betty said the HOA had the right to inspect common areas and property exteriors. I said this was not a common area. She said the side yard was visible from the street and therefore subject to community standards. I said that was not in the covenants. She said it was in the emergency addendum. I said the emergency addendum did not exist. She smiled. "Keep arguing. You are making my case for me." I pulled out my phone and started recording. Betty saw it and her expression shifted. She said I did not have permission to film her. I said I was on my own property and I could film whatever I wanted. She said she would file a harassment complaint. I said go ahead. The camera guy lowered his gimbal and looked uncomfortable. Betty turned to him and told him to keep shooting. He hesitated, then raised the camera again. I asked his name. He did not answer. I asked if he was licensed and bonded. He glanced at Betty. She said he did not have to answer my questions. I asked if he was being paid by the HOA. He said he was a contractor. I asked for his business card. He said he did not have one on him. I took a photo of his vest. It had a company logo, small and faded, but readable in the image. I zoomed in later and got the name. Betty walked around the side of the house, the camera guy following. I followed both of them. She stopped at the edge of the driveway and pointed at my trash cans. She said they were visible from the side street and that was a violation. I said the covenants allowed trash cans to be stored in side yards as long as they were not in front of the house. She said the interpretation had changed. I asked when. She said it was clarified in the emergency addendum. I said, "Show me the addendum." She said it was on file. I said, "File it with me right now." She turned to the camera guy and said, "Document the refuse container placement and the lack of screening." He filmed the trash cans. I said, "This is harassment." Betty said this is enforcement, and if I continued to obstruct the inspection, she would add a separate violation for non-compliance. She walked to the front walkway and pulled out the infrared thermometer. She aimed it at the concrete and checked the screen. 24 degrees. She frowned. She aimed it at another spot. 26 degrees. She moved to the edge of the walk where a thin patch of ice had formed overnight. 19 degrees. She turned to the camera guy. Get this. He zoomed in on the patch. She turned to me and said the ice hazard had not been remedied and she was upgrading the violation to a safety emergency. I said I salted that walkway twice. She said the salt was not working. I said the air temperature was 15 degrees and nothing was going to melt at 15 degrees. She said that proved my point. If the surface could not be maintained, I should install heating cables or remove the walkway entirely. I stared at her. Remove the walkway. She said it like it was a reasonable suggestion. I asked to see the safety emergency criteria. She said it was based on board discretion. I said discretion had to be applied consistently. She said it was being applied consistently. I asked if she had issued safety emergency citations to anyone else in the neighborhood. She said that was confidential. I asked if the board had established a temperature threshold for walkways. She said the board reviewed each case individually. I said that was selective enforcement. She said it was thorough enforcement. I asked if she had inspected her own walkway. She did not answer. I asked again. She turned and walked toward the street. The camera guy followed. I called after her. She did not look back. I went inside and uploaded the video to my laptop. I watched it twice. Betty's voice was clear. Her contradictions were clear. The camera guy's hesitation was clear. I saved the file and added it to the evidence folder. 13 files. I opened my email and drafted a message to the board president. I attached the video. I wrote that the safety committee chair had conducted an unscheduled inspection, trespassed on my property, and threatened me with escalating fines based on invented criteria. I wrote that I was requesting an immediate hearing to address the pattern of harassment. I wrote that if the board did not respond within 5 business days, I would file a complaint with the city and consider legal action. I read the email 3 times, deleted the legal action line because I did not want to overplay my hand, and hit send. Friday morning, Craig called me. He said Betty had been at the January board meeting and there was audio. The meetings were recorded and archived on the community portal, but you had to dig for them. He said he had listened to the January file and Betty had said something about cracking down on problem residents. He said her exact words were, "Some people think they can ignore the standards and we need to send a message." He said it was not clear who she was talking about, but the context made it obvious. I asked if he could send me the audio file. He said he could do better. He had edited out the relevant section and saved it as a separate clip. He sent it to my phone. I listened to it twice. Betty's voice. Clear and cold. Some people think they can ignore the standards and we need to send a message. I saved the clip and added it to the evidence folder. 14 files. Saturday, I got an email from the board president. He said the board had reviewed my complaint and found no evidence of misconduct by the safety committee chair. He said the inspections were conducted in accordance with HOA policy and my objections were noted but not sustained. He said the fines would remain in place and I had 10 days to pay or the board would proceed with lien filing. He said I was welcome to attend the March board meeting if I wanted to address the board in person. He said I would have 3 minutes during the open comment period. I read the email twice and felt my jaw tighten. 3 minutes. I called my friend in risk management. I told her everything. The fines, the tow, the inspections, the harassment, the pattern. She asked if I had documentation. I said I had 14 files. She said send them. I sent her the whole folder in a zip file. She called me back 2 hours later. She said this was textbook liability exposure. An HOA officer using her position to target specific residents, vendor collusion, lack of due process, inconsistent enforcement. She said if this went to litigation, the HOA's insurance carrier would have to defend it, but they would also conduct an internal review to determine if the board had acted in bad faith. If the carrier found bad faith, they could deny coverage or drop the policy entirely. She said most HOA boards did not understand how serious that was. Without insurance, the board could be personally liable for damages. She asked if I was planning to sue. I said no. She said good, because the threat of a coverage review would be enough. She said I should write a letter to the board and the management company outlining the harassment pattern and stating that I had shared the documentation with an insurance professional who believed the HOA's coverage was at risk. She said I did not have to threaten anything directly. Just let them know the information was out there. I drafted the letter that night. I kept it short and factual. I listed the violation dates, the fine amounts, the inspection incidents, and the tow. I described the contradictions in Betty's statements and the lack of documentation for the emergency addendum. I noted that I had shared the timeline with a risk management professional who had raised concerns about the HOA's liability exposure. I wrote that I was requesting a full hearing before the board to address the pattern of selective enforcement, and to seek rescission of all fines and reimbursement of towing fees. I wrote that I expected a response within 7 business days. I printed the letter, signed it, and mailed it certified to the board president and the management company. I kept copies for my records. Monday, I got a call from the property manager. She sounded nervous. She said the board had received my letter and wanted to schedule a meeting. Not the March board meeting, but a separate meeting. She said the board was willing to hear my concerns in a more private setting. I asked when. She said Tuesday evening, 7 o'clock at the management company office. I asked if Betty would be there. She paused, then said all committee chairs were invited, but attendance was optional. I said I wanted the meeting recorded. She said the board did not typically record special meetings. I said I would record it myself. She said that was my right. I said I would be there. Tuesday evening, I showed up at the management company office at 6:50. Craig came with me. He said he was there as a witness and a concerned resident. The property manager met us in the lobby and led us to a conference room. The board president was already there along with 2 other board members I did not recognize. Betty was not there. I asked where she was. The board president said she had a scheduling conflict. I said this meeting was about her conduct and she should be present. He said she had been notified and chose not to attend. I set my phone on the table and started recording. The board president frowned but did not object. I started with the timeline. December firewood comment. January walkway violation. January compliance inspection. January tow. February follow-up inspection. I listed the fines. I listed the contradictions. I showed them the violation notices. I showed them the tow receipt. I showed them the inspection video. I played the audio clip from the January board meeting. Betty's voice filled the room. Some people think they can ignore the standards and we need to send a message. One of the board members shifted in her seat. The board president rubbed his forehead. I told them I had shared all of this with a risk management professional who believed the HOA's liability coverage was at risk. I did not say I was going to sue. I did not say I was going to file a complaint. I just let the words hang there. Liability coverage. At risk. The board president cleared his throat. He said the board took these concerns seriously. He said the safety committee operated independently but was accountable to the board. He said the board would review the enforcement actions and determine if any corrections were needed. I asked what that meant. He said it meant they would look into it. I asked for a timeline. He said 30 days. I said that was not acceptable. He said it was the best he could do. Craig leaned forward. He said he had been a resident of Westgate for 12 years and he had never seen this level of targeted enforcement. He said Betty had been hitting multiple residents with questionable violations and the pattern was undeniable. He said the board had a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the community, and right now the community was watching to see if the board would hold a committee chair accountable. He said if the board did not act, residents would start asking questions at the next meeting, and those questions would not be friendly. The board president looked at Craig, then at me, then at the other two board members. One of them, a man in a gray sweater, said maybe we should put Betty on administrative leave pending the review. The board president said that was premature. The man said it would show the residents we are taking this seriously. The board president said he would discuss it with Betty. I asked if the fines would be suspended during the review. The board president said no. I asked why not. He said the fines were issued under proper authority and would remain in place unless the review found otherwise. I said that was not fair. He said it was policy. Craig said the policy was being applied inconsistently, and that was the whole problem. The board president said the meeting was over. I said I wanted a written summary of the review process and the expected timeline. He said the property manager would send it to me. I said I wanted it within 48 hours. He stood up and left the room. The other two board members followed. Craig and I sat in the conference room for a minute after they left. He said that went better than he expected. I said I did not feel better. He said the board was rattled, and rattled boards made mistakes. He said I should keep pressing. I asked what he meant. He said I should file a formal records request for all communications between Betty and the contractor, all vendor contracts, and all safety committee meeting minutes. He said if there was financial funny business, it would show up in the contracts. I said I did not know how to do that. He said he would help me draft the request. We left the office and drove back to the neighborhood. Wednesday morning, I got an email from the property manager. It was a one-page summary of the review process. The board would conduct an internal audit of the safety committee's enforcement actions over the last 6 months. The audit would include a review of all violation notices, inspection reports, and vendor contracts. The audit would be completed within 30 days, and the findings would be presented at the March board meeting. There was no mention of suspending the fines. There was no mention of administrative leave for Betty. I forwarded the email to Craig. He called me 10 minutes later. He said 30 days was too long. He said I should show up at the next board meeting and make noise. I said I would. Thursday, I filed the records request. Craig helped me draft it. We asked for all emails and text messages between Betty and the contractor from December through February. We asked for copies of all vendor contracts and proof of insurance for the contractor. We asked for all safety committee meeting minutes from the last 12 months. We cited the Montana Open Records Statute and noted that the HOA had 14 days to respond. I mailed it certified. I kept a copy for my records. Friday, I got a text from an unknown number. It said, "Stop harassing the board or you will regret it." I screenshot the text and saved it. I called Craig. He said, "Do not respond." He said it was probably Betty or someone acting on her behalf. He said, "Save everything, and if it escalates, file a police report." I said I would. I did not respond to the text. I just added the screenshot to the evidence folder. 15 files. The next week was quiet. No calls, no emails, no inspections. I went to work, I came home, I kept my head down. I checked the mail every day. No response to the records request. No word from the board. I started to think maybe they were hoping I would just go away. But I was not going anywhere. March 10th, the night of the board meeting, I showed up at the community center at 6:30. The meeting was scheduled for 7. The room was already filling up. Craig was there. A dozen other residents. I recognized a few faces from the neighborhood. One woman came up to me and said she had gotten a bogus fine from Betty too. She said she was glad someone was finally standing up to her. I thanked her. She said if I needed a witness, she would testify. I said I might take her up on that. The board president called the meeting to order at 7. He ran through the usual business: budget report, maintenance updates, landscaping contract renewal. Then he opened the floor for resident comments. I stood up. He said, "State your name and address for the record." I did. He said I had 3 minutes. I said I needed more. He said 3 minutes was the policy. I said this was about a pattern of harassment by the safety committee chair and 3 minutes was not enough. He said I could submit written comments if I needed more time. I said I had already submitted written comments and the board had not responded. He said the board was conducting a review. I asked when the review would be complete. He said soon. I asked for a date. He said he did not have one. Betty walked into the room. She was wearing a different coat, dark gray this time, but the same reflective armband was strapped over her sleeve. She sat in the front row and crossed her arms. She looked at me and smiled. I felt my pulse quicken. I turned back to the board president. I said the review had been promised 30 days ago and I still had not seen any results. He said the review was ongoing. I said that was not acceptable. He said he understood my frustration, but the process took time. I said the process was being dragged out to avoid accountability. He said that was not true. I said, "Prove it." He said the board did not have to prove anything to me. I said the board had a fiduciary duty to the community, and right now the community was watching. Craig stood up. He said he had been a resident for 12 years and he had never seen this level of dysfunction. He said the board was protecting a committee chair who was clearly abusing her authority. He said the community deserved transparency and accountability. The board president said the board was accountable to the community and would act in the community's best interest. Craig said, "Then act." The board president said the meeting was moving on. Craig said, "We are not done." The board president said, "Yes, you are." He moved to the next agenda item. I sat down. My hands were shaking. Betty turned around and looked at me. She mouthed something I could not make out. I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app. I did not start recording yet, but I wanted it ready. The board president droned on about landscaping bids and fence repairs. I stopped listening. I was running through the next steps in my head. If the board did not act, I would file a complaint with the city. If the city did not act, I would go to the state. If the state did not act, I would find a lawyer. I was not going to let this go. After the meeting, I waited in the parking lot. Betty came out 10 minutes later. She was talking on her phone. I walked over and stood a few feet away. She saw me and ended the call. She said, "Can I help you?" I said I wanted to know why she was targeting me. She said I was not being targeted. I said the evidence said otherwise. She said there was no evidence. I said I had 14 files. She laughed. She said files do not matter if the board is on my side. I said the board was not going to protect her forever. She said, "We will see." She got in her car and drove away. I went home and sat at the kitchen table. I opened my laptop and pulled up the evidence folder. 15 files now, with the text thread. I went through each one and made notes. Dates, amounts, contradictions, witness statements. I was building a case even though I said I was not. I could not help it. The pattern was too clear. Betty was abusing her authority. The board was covering for her. The management company was either complicit or incompetent. And I was the one paying the price. The next day, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. I answered. A woman's voice said she was calling from the City Code Enforcement Office. She said they had received a complaint about HOA overreach in the Westgate neighborhood and wanted to know if I had any information. I asked who filed the complaint. She said it was anonymous. I asked what kind of information they were looking for. She said anything related to improper fining, towing, or harassment by the HOA board. I said I had plenty. She said she would email me a complaint form and I could submit whatever I had. I said I would send it today. She thanked me and hung up. I filled out the form that afternoon. I attached the timeline, the violation notices, the tow receipt, the inspection video, and the audio clip from the board meeting. I wrote a cover letter explaining the pattern of harassment and the board's refusal to act. I submitted it online and kept a copy for my records. I did not know if it would make a difference, but it felt like progress. 2 days later, I got an email from the property manager. The subject line said Records Request Response. I opened it. The email said the HOA had completed the records request and the documents were attached. I downloaded the files. There were 3. One was a vendor contract between the HOA and the contractor Betty had been using. It was dated December 1st and signed by Betty as Safety Committee Chair. The contract paid the contractor $200 per inspection. The second file was a spreadsheet listing all inspections conducted from December through February. 23 inspections. $4,600 in contractor fees. The third file was a single page of meeting minutes from a safety committee meeting in November. The minutes said the committee had approved the vendor contract and authorized the chair to sign. I read the contract twice. It was a standard service agreement, nothing obviously illegal. But the inspection list was interesting. 23 inspections in 3 months. I recognized a few addresses. My property was listed 3 times. 2 other residents I knew were listed twice each. The rest were scattered across the neighborhood. I pulled up the HOA directory and cross-referenced the addresses. A pattern emerged. Every property on the list belonged to someone who had either questioned the board at a meeting, voted against a recent assessment increase, or filed a complaint about HOA overreach. I made a spreadsheet and color-coded the addresses. The correlation was undeniable. I called Craig. I told him what I found. He said that was a budget review that reveals vendor favoritism. I said it was more than that. It was retaliation. He said the board would never admit it, but the pattern was clear enough that a city investigator would see it. I said I was sending the spreadsheet to the code enforcement office. He said good. He said I should also send it to the board president with a note asking him to explain why enforcement was concentrated on a specific subset of residents. I said I would. I drafted the email that night. I attached the spreadsheet and wrote a short note. I said the inspection records showed a clear pattern of selective enforcement targeting residents who had previously raised concerns about board conduct. I said this pattern raised questions about the vendor relationship and the motivations behind the safety committee's actions. I said I was requesting a written explanation from the board within 7 days. I sent the email to the board president and copied the property manager and the other board members. I kept a copy for my records. The next morning, I got a reply from the board president. It was 1 sentence. The board does not comment on pending reviews. I replied with 1 sentence. The review has been pending for 6 weeks and residents deserve answers. He did not reply. That afternoon, I got a call from the code enforcement office, the same woman I had spoken to before. She said they had reviewed my complaint and the attached documentation. She said the city did not have direct authority over HOA enforcement actions, but they did have authority over snow removal and right-of-way issues. She said if the HOA was interfering with city snow routes or creating public safety hazards, the city could issue a warning or a fine. She asked if the HOA had been blocking snow removal or restricting access to public streets. I said Betty had been enforcing a street parking ban during snow events, and some residents had complained that the ban was being applied inconsistently. She said that was helpful. She said she would follow up with the HOA management company and request documentation of the snow emergency policy. She said if the policy was not properly adopted or was being selectively enforced, the city could step in. I thanked her. 2 days later, I got another call from the property manager. She sounded agitated. She said the city had contacted the HOA and requested documentation of the snow emergency parking ban. She said the board was scrambling to find the documentation because it turned out the ban had never been formally adopted. She said it was an informal policy that Betty had implemented on her own authority, and now the city was asking questions. She said the board was going into emergency session to address the issue. I said good. She said she was calling to let me know that the board had decided to suspend all pending fines related to snow removal and walkway maintenance pending further review. I said, what about the towing fees? She said the board was still discussing reimbursement. I said I wanted a decision by the end of the week. She said she would pass that along. I called Craig and told him the fines were suspended. He said that was a win. I said it was not enough. He said it was a start. He said the board was in damage control mode and that was the time to push. He said I should show up at the emergency session and demand Betty's removal. I said when was the session? He said he did not know, but he would find out. He called me back an hour later. He said the emergency session was scheduled for Friday night at 6 and it was technically open to residents. I said I would be there. Friday evening, I showed up at the community center at 5:45. Craig was already there. So were a dozen other residents. The board president walked in at 5:55 and looked surprised to see so many people. He said the meeting was an executive session and residents were not allowed. Craig said executive sessions had to be noticed in advance, and this one was not. The board president said it was an emergency, and the bylaws allowed for emergency sessions without notice. Craig said the bylaws required a quorum and a valid emergency. He asked what the emergency was. The board president said it was a personnel matter. Craig said Betty was not an employee, she was a volunteer committee chair, and personnel rules did not apply. The board president said the meeting was closed. Craig said we were not leaving. The board president looked at the property manager. She shrugged. He sighed and said fine, the meeting would be open, but residents could not speak unless recognized. We sat down. The board president called the meeting to order. He said the board had received a notice from the City Code Enforcement Office regarding the snow emergency parking ban. He said the city had determined that the ban was not properly adopted and was being selectively enforced. He said the city had issued a warning and required the HOA to either formally adopt the policy through a board vote or discontinue enforcement. He said the board was voting to discontinue enforcement. One of the board members, the woman in the gray sweater, said she wanted to discuss the vendor relationship with the contractor Betty had been using. She said the inspection records showed a pattern that raised questions. The board president said that was not on the agenda. She said it should be. She said the community deserved to know if vendor favoritism was influencing enforcement decisions. The board president said the audit was ongoing. She said the audit had been ongoing for 6 weeks and nothing had happened. She said the board needed to act now. The board president said he would take it under advisement. She said that was not good enough. She moved to place Betty on administrative leave pending completion of the audit. The man in the gray sweater seconded. The board president said the motion was out of order. The woman said why. He said because Betty was not present to defend herself. The woman said Betty had been invited and chose not to attend. The board president called for a vote. 2 in favor, 2 opposed. The motion failed. I stood up. The board president said I was not recognized. I said I did not care. I said the community had been watching this board protect Betty for 6 weeks while she harassed residents and wasted HOA funds on bogus inspections. I said the vendor contract was a budget review that reveals vendor favoritism, and the board knew it. I said the board had a choice. They could hold Betty accountable, or they could explain to the city why the HOA was interfering with snow routes and targeting residents who questioned board decisions. I said the city was already asking questions, and the insurance company would be next. The room went quiet. The board president stared at me. One of the other board members, a man I had not heard speak before, said maybe we should revisit the motion. The board president said the motion had failed. The man said we should revote. The woman in the gray sweater said she agreed. The board president said this was irregular. The man said a lot of things about this situation were irregular. He moved to reconsider the motion to place Betty on administrative leave. The woman seconded. The board president sighed and called for a vote. 3 in favor, 1 opposed. The motion passed. The board president said the board would notify Betty of the decision and the audit would be expedited. He said the findings would be presented at the next regular board meeting. I asked when that was. He said April 14th. I said that was 5 weeks away. He said it was the schedule. Craig stood up and said the community expected updates before then. The board president said updates would be posted on the portal. Craig said that was not good enough. The board president said the meeting was adjourned. He stood up and walked out. The other board members followed. The residents stayed in the room for a few minutes after the board left. A few people came up to me and thanked me. One man said he had been fined for leaving his trash cans out too long, and now he understood why. A woman said she had been afraid to speak up because she did not want to be targeted next. Craig said the board was finally starting to crack. I said we would see. The next week, I got an email from the property manager. It said the HOA had completed the vendor audit and found irregularities in the contractor relationship. It said the contractor had been removed from the approved vendor list and the vendor relationship tied to the abuse had been canceled by the HOA. It said all fines issued based on the contractor's inspections were being rescinded. It said residents who had paid fines would receive refunds within 30 days. It said I would receive a check for $950. I read the email twice. I called Craig. I told him what happened. He said that was the HOA consequence. I said it felt like a win. He said it was. 2 days later, I got another email. This one was from the board president. It said Betty Evans had resigned from the safety committee chair position effective immediately. It said Karen loses her committee role immediately and the board would appoint an interim chair until the next election. It said the board appreciated Betty's service to the community and wished her well. I deleted the email. I did not care about the board's appreciation. I cared that she was gone. The following week, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered. It was Betty. She said I had ruined her reputation. I said she had ruined it herself. She said the board had thrown her under the bus. I said the board had protected her for as long as they could. She said I was going to regret this. I said I did not think so. She said the neighborhood would turn on me. I said the neighborhood already knew what she had done. She hung up. I saved the call log and added it to the evidence folder. 16 files. A week later, I was driving home from work when I saw a tow truck at the neighborhood gate. It was stopped in the middle of the entrance, blocking traffic. A line of cars was backed up behind it. I pulled over and walked up. The tow truck driver was standing outside his cab, arguing with someone on the phone. I heard him say the paperwork is not here and I am not hooking the vehicle without authorization. I looked past him and saw Betty standing next to a car with a bright orange parking violation sticker on the windshield. She was holding her phone and yelling at the driver. She said the authorization was filed and he needed to do his job. He said he did not have anything on file and he was not moving until he did. I walked up to the driver. I said, "What is going on?" He said the HOA called him to tow a vehicle for violating the parking rules, but when he got here, the paperwork was not in the system. He said he called the office and they said there was no tow request on file. Betty turned and saw me. Her face went red. She said this was none of my business. I said it was everyone's business if she was trying to tow someone without authorization. She said the authorization was filed. The driver said no. It was not. She said he was lying. He held up his phone and showed her the screen. No active requests. She stared at the screen, then at me, then at the growing line of cars behind the tow truck. She said, "Fine, cancel the tow." The driver said it was already canceled. She got in her car and drove off. The driver looked at me and shook his head. He said he had been doing this for 15 years and he had never seen anything like this. He said Karen insists the tow is authorized and the tow driver hesitates because he has dealt with this HOA before and the paperwork is always a mess. I said this HOA had a history. He said he was not coming back. He got in his truck and drove off. The line of cars started moving again. I walked back to my work truck and sat in the cab for a minute. I felt something shift. Betty was done. The board knew it. The management company knew it. The tow companies knew it. She had finally pushed too far and burned too many bridges. The April board meeting was packed, every seat was full and people were standing along the walls. The board president called the meeting to order and immediately addressed the elephant in the room. He said the board had completed the audit of the safety committee's enforcement actions. He said the audit had found that the committee chair had acted outside the scope of her authority, had used a vendor relationship to target specific residents, and had created liability exposure for the HOA. He said the board had accepted the committee chair's resignation and had canceled the vendor relationship. He said all fines issued under the Safety Committee's authority from December through March were being rescinded and refunds would be issued. He said the board was implementing new oversight procedures to prevent similar issues in the future. He said the board regretted the disruption and thanked the community for their patience. Craig stood up during the comment period. He said the community appreciated the board's action, but residents wanted to know what consequences Betty would face beyond losing her committee role. The board president said Betty was no longer involved with the HOA and the board considered the matter closed. Craig said that was not enough. He said Betty had harassed residents, wasted HOA funds, and created legal exposure. He said the community deserved accountability. The board president said the board had taken appropriate action and would not discuss personnel matters further. Craig sat down. I could see he was frustrated, but I was not. Betty was gone. The fines were gone. The vendor was gone. That was enough. After the meeting, a dozen residents came up to me and thanked me. One woman said I had saved her from a $1,500 fine for leaving her holiday decorations up too long. A man said he had been afraid to fight his fine because he did not think anyone would believe him. Another woman said she was running for the board in the next election and wanted to make sure this never happened again. I shook hands and exchanged phone numbers. I felt tired, but good. The refund check arrived 3 weeks later. $950. I deposited it and closed the folder on my laptop. 16 files. I did not delete them, but I did not look at them anymore either. The fight was over. The HOA had backed down. Betty was gone. The neighborhood was moving on. I ran into Craig at the mailbox a few days later. He asked how I was doing. I said I was fine. He said I should run for the board. I laughed. I said I had no interest in being part of that circus. He said the circus needed people who were not afraid to push back. I said maybe next year. He said he would hold me to that. We talked for a few more minutes, then went our separate ways. That night, I sat on my porch and looked out at the neighborhood. The snow was melting. The streets were clear. The firewood stack was still on the side of the house, covered and stacked, just like it had been in October. No one had said a word about it since Betty left. The walkway was clear and salted, the same way it had been all winter. No one had measured the temperature, no one had threatened me with fines. The HOA was quiet. The board was cautious. And I was free. I thought about the last 6 months, the late nights, the documentation, the stress, the hearings. I thought about Betty's face when the tow driver told her the paperwork was not on file. I thought about the board president's expression when I stood up at the emergency meeting and laid out the pattern. I thought about Craig standing next to me at the management company office, backing me up when I needed it. I thought about the 14 files that became 16 files, the timeline that became evidence, the anger that became action. It was not about revenge. It was about standing up. It was about refusing to be pushed around by someone who thought the rules gave her power over other people. It was about showing the board that residents were not afraid, and that accountability mattered. It was about making sure the next person who got a bogus violation notice knew they were not alone. I appreciate you being part of this.